I'm going to tell you a secret, but first, you have to promise me you won't laugh. Is still an uncomfortable subject for me, so I appreciate for your understanding. Do we have a deal? When I was 5 years old, I watched a movie no child should ever see. I don't remember much about the circumstances of me viewing, other than that it was all at my house where my family lived, late at night, in the dark, with only the television providing light. The film was an animated feature, and depicted themes such as animal cruelty, death, and dismemberment. The scenes were so real and so terrifying that it left a deep impression in me. For years on afterwards, the scene I can only remember clearly was when the evil man was drowning a family of cats in the stream, which I would have nightmares about it for years afterwards. I remember seeing it early in the movie, followed by many more disturbing, surreal scenes. Remember your promise, because this is the part I was talking about. I never told anybody about what I saw, but the name of the movie was well known, The Aristocats. I suppose I could forgive you if you broke your promise, but I must empathize that I'm not joking. I saw a movie called The Aristocats, filled with scenes that I've described, and it scarred me for life. I don't think much about the experience very often, but as always at the back of my mind in some way, though I didn't realize it at the time. I now know that it caused me to shy away from the animation of children's shows. It subtly informed my whole outlook of the trappings of my childhood. I found myself bracing with dread whenever I had to watch any children's animation in school. My childhood was relatively normal otherwise, for an introvert anyway, but every once in a while, I think it would be back to the movie and find my inner peace disturbed. It wasn't until maybe the 3rd or 4th grade that I started to realize that my experience with the movie had not been typical. And I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents, about what I had witnessed in that dark room at the age of 5. But eventually I figured out on my own that there was nothing horrific about the version everyone else had watched. I was still willing to see it for myself, but I figured that they may have had what I had. I would have been able to tell whenever they spoke about the film. Anyone who has anything to say about it seemed to consider it either a nostalgic classic or unremarkable. When I was in middle school, I asked my mom if I ever seen the Aristocats, and she said once. Having to stay up past my bedtime and watch it secretly, she said it seemingly strangely disturbed by the film, and never I had watched it again as a small child. I asked her if we still had it in the house, but she said I had been so afraid of that movie that she had thrown it out. It had been a home VHS recording she brought home in an estate sale, rather than a retail copy. I finally decided to watch the movie again. I ordered it from the library and watched it. One Saturday, it took me about a couple of hours to work up the courage to finally hit play. I found it to be a wonderful film. Immediately I realized that whatever I remembered seeing at the age of 5 had nothing to do with the movie. There was no graphic violence, no psychological scenes. Nothing should have traumatized me as a child. And yet what I've seen all those years ago definitely shared elements with this movie. The kids and their mother were drugged and kidnapped, not drowned, but I instantly recognized the moments leading up to this vergris. Now, and I almost had a flashback of a cartoon drowning I had witnessed. I was hoping to find a closure, but instead I was more troubled than ever. There was no question in mind now that I had viewed the awful perverted version of the classic film. I told one of my friends about it a few days later. I didn't tell them how convinced I was when I had seen it as such a young child. Instead, simply just relating to it as vague and even confused memory. Like, hey, the other day I saw the Aristocats. I used to be terrified of that movie because, for some reason, I thought I saw gore scenes and cats drowning when I watched it at the age of 5. Funny how your memory plays tricks on you at that age, isn't it? He told me about that movie, Fairytale. He explained it was an anime movie about cats with a similar animation style that contained graphic gore scenes, and it was definitely not for children. He said maybe somehow that he's seen that movie instead of the Aristocats. I streamed and I watched Philadelphia, and I saw that my friend meant the style having the same feeling as the Aristocats, but except dark and bloody. But it wasn't what I had seen. I knew for sure that the 5-year-old me had watched a movie with the same characters as the Aristocats, and I knew for sure that it wasn't contained in bizarre and disturbing scenes, not shown in the mainstream version. This whole thing was driving me up the wall, trying to get some kind of closure. I started seeking out and watching old children's animation contain graphic and disturbing elements that would never be included today, such as Watership Down, the 1978 version. While these works were interesting and gripping their own way, they had this decidedly non-Disney, while the other studios may have been willing to take such risks with the works decades ago. The fact the Aristocats is Disney property made sure that the version I had seen was something absolutely not supposed to whatever. I let go of it after a while. A few years passed, and in college, I learned about this internet urban legend called lost episodes. People claim to have seen lost episodes of TV shows or alternate versions of movies, usually animated, that contain graphic and disturbing content. The episode or movie was often found in unexpected places, and those claiming that they have seen it often said it mysteriously disappeared, whether it was through a VHS tape appearing somehow and self-erase, a website going dead immediately after viewing, etc. To be honest, I didn't put too much stock in the validity of these stories, but with my Aristocats experience still back in my mind, I decided to look further into it. I found a YouTube channel called Cartoon Geek, which was discussing a certain lost episode for his 40,000 subscribers special. After going through the obligatory thanks to talking about how much his subscribers meant to him, and all that, he began with, "Now for those who are new to the channel, I'm basically a guy obsessed with all things nostalgic and geeky about cartoons and other media. Most of my content is simply reviewing old cartoons and whatnot, usually superhero related. However, I also do a side series on the strange and creepy side of animation. For an example, my 20k sub special was a 3-part series on Disney and their alleged subliminal messages in the film and television. And this video you are watching is sort of in the same vein. We're going to be talking about another certain lost episode. For those who don't know what lost episodes are, basically urban legends about TV shows which are lost, as the name implies. These episodes said to contain graphic and or disturbing and surreal elements that are generally regarded in material that the public was not meant to see. A few months ago, I have covered the alleged lost episode from the 1968 animation series called The Adventures of Batman. I loved that show when I was a kid, and though I thought it's been a decades before my time, and there was one episode of a scene where Batman and Robin fell through a trap door set by a Joker to side for their doom. At the end of the tunnel was an open giant furnace looking like the Joker's face. Of course, this scene is from a kids show, so they didn't actually slide into the furnace and burn alive. They just got out with their gadgets. So to recap, in the 2009, by this anonymous internet post started circulating online about the alleged lost episode of this scene. In the dynamic duo actually is decided into the furnace, burn alive, scream, and are shown graphically being burned to a crisp, followed by surreal and non-linear scenes of grieving friends of Bruce Wayne and his mourning in the funeral service. Now, when I did this first video on this subject, I was honest with you guys that I didn't really think that there was much credibility to this story. I feel to keep an open mind about this show, but then there was just certain elements of that post that make me really uneasy. Okay, so this probably was bullshit, but like the tape conventionally erased off after the anonymous author reviewed it. But since I've gotten a bit of comments and emails talking about how allegedly this lost episode has been posted online, naturally, a lot of you people are saying that this is fake, but the topic won its poll for this special, so let's find out. For some more preamble, the video then cut to a legit lost episode. At the part where Batman and Robin sliding down the tunnel towards the furnace, all the parts were there to use with belt gadgets to get free where they were removed. And when the two finally closed to the furnace, the scene then filled with fire. The two poor quality shrieks played, but after that there was some strange abstract scenes, but all these seemed to be simply random. Clips from another episodes were playing and some editing effects were thrown at them. The cartoon geek returned. Alright, so right off the Batman and Robin die off screen, which is obviously not what happened in the lost episode post that was shared around. They basically just used the flames from earlier in the scene to cut over to make it look like Batman and Robin died, adding the canned scream effect. The surreal scenes that you follow are just so random clips throughout the show that with various editing tricks applied. I could have done some myself, so while this is impressive work, I think it's pretty clear that this is a fan project inspired by the anonymous posts. I'm going to rate this animation myth as debunked for now. He gave some more breakdown and some deconstruction of the clip, before ending with some kind of promotional giveaway. What really got my attention, however, was at their comments. They were all at least a few people insisting that the lost episode was real, and they had seen it with their own eyes. I PM'd one of those people and asked if they have seen the episode, about the circumstance. He responded within the hour, "Yeah, I was in summer school and during recess, I snuck off to the school's library back room to be alone. I put a VHS of a cartoon and that's when I saw it. Honestly, I wasn't really disturbed back then, since my parents let me watch R-rated horror movies and stuff back then, lol. But yeah, man, this thing is real." I asked if he knew any information about the other supposed lost episode or phenomena, but he then did not. I did some research on my own, and there was a few lost episode stories floating around on the internet, mostly about children's shows, to be honest. Not many of them seemed to be creditable, but still, I strongly felt that there was something real here behind all the establishment and fictionalization. I decided to see if there was any such stories surrounding the Aristocats. My searches of the disturbing content in the movie returned but nothing but expected, this is one scene of the Aristocats, totally scared me to life as a kid. Stuff for more information about the Fidel movie. I tried to reaching out to one of the created animators, writers, and even crew members, verifying about the contents for my emails so the cast can have a wide net possible. For example, my emails focused on disturbed content that may have been cut, while other drafts asked more generally out loud about alternative versions or cut scenes. I also expanded my web searchers, and I began using the search engine tricks that I could find. I started using the obscure and foreign language engines, and after a few months of no information and no responses to my email queries, I started to think that maybe I should just forget about the whole thing. Maybe my real memories of watching the Aristocats had merged with some other nightmare. I had to create my present memories, and maybe repeating those old ones to myself so many times during my childhood had falsely convinced me of their reality. I was going to consign this to a newfound self-closure when I found something during one of my foreign language searches. It was a Fred Chinese message board. The OP had a JPEG image, and the text roughly translated to "The Aristocats movie creepy." If I had the coffee drop to the spill all over my computer, I would have. The image dashed away any hope I had of passing off my childhood experience as a traumatic nightmare that had stuck in my mind longer than it should have. It was a frame of whatever twisted version of the Aristocats I had seen, and while I hadn't actually remembered this particular still, until I found this image message board, the instant I remembered the clip, more memories started flooding back. The vague, but still vivid, and and definitely real. I was now and more firmly convinced than ever before that violent version of the movie was real. The image was of a black kitten, Burlowals, and his face was filled to the frame. His eyes were wide and terrified, and red veins were bulging out of his fur, standing up as if charged with electricity. The picture itself wasn't more than inherently disturbing than grotesque fan art you could find all kinds of different shows and movies. Unlike those other images, I knew this one generally had a sinister story, some kind of behind it, such as haunted me like no image ever had. There was only a couple of replies on the thread, to which they were both short, and neither of them provided any more information about this image. I used Google Translate to ask the OP for information, but never received a response. I performed a reverse image search of the file, and I returned but no results. However, a few weeks later, I finally got a reply from one of the emails that I had sent to the production staff. The reply was one of the emails that I had written that hinted more strongly than the reality of what I have seen as a kid. The response was short and curt, but it gave me some new hope of finding answers. Hello, sorry for the late response, but I read between your lines in the message, and if you've seen what I think you're hinting at, you need to look into the Lost Media Group. That's all I'm going to say on the subject. I googled Lost Media Group, but the closest thing I could find was a website for an online club called Lost Media Society. It was a site for media enthusiasts and to collect, trade, sell, buy, and discuss lost media, including lost episodes as in real lost episodes that simply never aired, not urban legend ones that contain surreal, disturbing, or even supernatural content. The community was interesting in its own right, and I became more involved into it, eventually even becoming the site moderator. Once I was established at all respective regular, I decided to PM one of the admins to ask about the Lost Episodes legend. He responded that he had heard of it, but it wasn't really something that the site was going to deal with. He then recalled of the past, and it had been talked about by some kind of even suggesting banning the discussion about it, since it has been seen as a spam topic afterwards. I asked him if he knew the organization about the Lost Media Group, and he said that he had heard of it, but don't know anything much about it, and suggested I should contact a certain other admin who did know more about this entirely. I messaged this admin and got a response within an hour. He told me that the Lost Media Group was elegantly arranged by someone behind the Lost Episodes phenomenon. According to him, they produced not only just the alternate versions of the movies and television episodes, but they were also still said to make their own versions of other media, such as video games and comic books. He said that he did not know much about them, other than the Lost Media collectors were willing to pay large sums for their infamous work by this group. And by that, the Lost Media Society had banned the discussion of Lost Episodes legend for some of these collectors, had even asked them about it on the site. I asked that if he could refer to such as me as a collector, and he said that my best bet would be a certain retired site admin who was no longer active in the Lost Media Society. He linked me a couple of archive threads by this individual, asking about lost episodes, and he gave me the main man's address. I shot him an email asking about this interest in lost episodes, and even went as far as directly ask if he knew about a lost episode type version of the Aristocats.